Eric, and I'm here with you on an episode of Grave Time with Christian Apple. I'm a longtime Auburn resident, and we are here at the gravesite of Richard H. Barter, or as the locals back in the day used to refer to him as the infamous outlaw Rattlesnake Dick. And I guess we'll just start by reading his headstone, which he was born 1833 and was shot and killed in 1859. The headstone here says, Richard H. Barter, early day resident of Rattlesnake Bar, famed as the outlaw Rattlesnake Dick, fatally wounded in a gun duel with the law July 11th, 1859, near Martin Park Fire Station in Auburn. Originally buried in the old Auburn Cemetery on East Street, moved to this spot in 1893. No further seek his merits to disclose, nor draw his frailties from their dread abode. There they alike in trembling hope repose, the bosom of his Father and his God. So, Rattlesnake Dick is, he's not your typical old Western outlaw. Rattlesnake Dick, his real name is Richard Barter. He originally moved to Auburn, California with his sister and his sister's husband and I believe his brother. They came from Canada, and at that time Canada was a British colony, so they considered themselves to be Britons, and they came here for the California Gold Rush, seeking the American dream, their slice of the pie, if you will. And Richard Barter did not start off as an outlaw. As a matter of fact, he came from a Christian home, a Christian family, and he was actually driven to a life of crime and of being an outlaw through some pretty harsh and unfair treatment from other local 49ers in Auburn, as well as unfair treatment by the Placer County Sheriff's Department. He was falsely accused of committing crimes such as, horse thieving and stealing from a local general store, and he was acquitted in court on one of those occasions, and then on another occasion he was prosecuted, he was convicted, and actually sentenced to prison. And while he was serving his time, the real criminal who had committed the crime he was accused of actually copped to the crime, and he was acquitted of all charges and released. As you can tell, when you're accused of a crime like that, it generated a really bad reputation for him here in Auburn and in Placer County as being kind of a shady character, even though in reality he had done nothing wrong. So he did what he could to get away from it. He moved to Shasta County, where he successfully mined for a number of years, minded his own business. He didn't really strike it rich, but was still living as an upstanding citizen. That is until somebody from Placer County moved to Shasta, recognized him, and then all the rumors started flying again. And it was at that time that he became very jaded, if you will. He was pretty upset that he had been working really hard, trying very hard to make it as a miner, as an upstanding citizen, and yet it seemed like society and just citizens around him just didn't like him, whether it was maybe because he was from Canada, who really knows, but he was treated pretty unfairly. And at about that time, when the rumors started flying again, is when there are historical sources that say that he had spoken to acquaintances and said that he felt like society at large was setting their hand against him, and he was now preparing to set his hand against them. That also, we have sources from letters that he wrote to his sister as well, where he says basically the same thing. And that's where he decided that if society around him and the local government were going to be oppressing him and becoming a barrier between him and the American dream that he wanted and being successful, he was going to take it. So he became an outlaw. And his story is actually really incredible. We all have heard of Billy the Kid. We've all heard of Jesse James. This is the American outlaw that you've never heard of, that you should have heard of. During his criminal career, he stole more wealth and gold than Jesse James and his gang stole in their entire criminal career. And ironically, he died with absolutely nothing. He died dirt poor. The most famous heist that they pulled off was Rattlesnake and his gang robbed a mule train coming out of Siskiyou through the Trinity Mountains. It was they were bringing millions of dollars worth of Wells Fargo gold bullion, and Rattlesnake had found out about it by some drunken mining engineer who was just drunk at a local saloon, running off at the mouth about this mule train that would come through. And so he got the intel on it, and Rattlesnake actually split his gang in half. Half of the gang went up into the Trinity Mountains to set an ambush for this mule train, and Rattlesnake and the other half of the gang were to go steal fresh horses and mules to bring down all the gold from the mountains. Well, Rattlesnake's plan, his half of the gang, their plan to steal those mules was foiled. They were caught, they were arrested, and so the guy leading the other half of the gang, his name was George Skinner, and they successfully set an ambush. They tied up the guards on this mule train, and they stole the gold and started making their way back to Placer County. And today's street value, they stole about $9 million in Wells Fargo gold bullion. The only problem was they were supposed to be met halfway in the mountains by Rattlesnake and the other half of the gang with fresh horses and mules, because that's a lot of weight in gold. Well, turns out it was so heavy that they got stuck in the mountains. They weren't able to get it down. So George Skinner divided the gold amongst his half of the gang, amongst the members, and he took the other half by himself and buried it somewhere up in the Trinities. By the time George Skinner and the rest of Rattlesnake's gang got back to Auburn, the guards that they had tied up were able to loose their bindings and make it to the nearest town, where they wired through like Morse code to warn Placer County Sheriff's deputies that they had been robbed and that it was Rattlesnake's gang and that they were coming into Auburn. So by the time George Skinner and the rest of Rattlesnake's gang made it to Auburn, the sheriffs had an ambush waiting for them, and subsequently there was a gunfight that ensued as soon as they got into town. And during that gunfight, George Skinner was shot and killed, and he was the only one who knew the location of the rest of the buried gold bullion. And so the Placer County Sheriff's deputies were able to recover half of the gold, and the other half, to this day, is still buried up in the mountains somewhere. So there's about $3.5 million. $3.5 to $4 million worth of Wells Fargo gold bullion still buried up in the Trinity Mountains somewhere. And but yeah, it's an incredible story. This guy, Richard Barter, Rattlesnake Dick, he wasn't your typical outlaw. He was known for being quite the ladies' man. Had a way with the ladies. Very strapping, tall, muscular, and very charismatic. And a lot of the other men in the town hated him for that. But yeah, he raised some serious hell out here. And one of the historical records from Placer County says during the career of Rattlesnake Dick and his gang, it said that Placer County was a war zone. There was stagecoach robberies almost daily, and highwaymen and robber barons under every tree under the sun, waiting for people on the roads in and out of Auburn, California. And ultimately, Rattlesnake, he had kind of a rival, and that was Sheriff's Deputy John Boggs. John Boggs had arrested Rattlesnake on multiple occasions, and it was said of Rattlesnake Dick that there was not a single prison in Northern California that Rattlesnake was not able to escape from. So multiple times, this Deputy John Boggs had arrested Rattlesnake, and somehow Rattlesnake Dick was able to escape every single time and get free and go back to his life of crime and robbing stagecoaches. And ultimately, Rattlesnake Dick was with another gang member on horseback riding through Auburn on the night of July 11th, 1859. As we read earlier on the headstone, it was near the Martin Park Fire Station, which is over off of High Street and Lincoln Way. And someone in the town had spotted Rattlesnake riding through town on horseback. They notified a couple of sheriff's deputies, including one of the tax collectors, and 2 deputies and the tax collector rode after Rattlesnake, and a gunfight ensued. One of the deputies was shot and killed immediately by Rattlesnake and his fellow gang member, and Rattlesnake was mortally wounded in the gunfight. He was able to ride about a mile away, where he got off his horse, and his last work before dying was to scrawl on a piece of paper, "Rattlesnake dies, but he never surrenders, just like any good Briton." And then on the other side of the letter he wrote, "If John Boggs is dead, I am satisfied." It was late at night when the gunfight happened, and Rattlesnake Dick had assumed that it was his rival, Deputy Boggs, who had rode out and engaged him in this gunfight. So he just assumed that it was John Boggs. It really wasn't. It was two other deputies and one of the tax collectors. So he had thought that he had shot and killed John Boggs, but John Boggs was actually safe and not involved in that gunfight. So Rattlesnake's body was found the next day. They found him clutching that note that he wrote in his hand, and it had appeared that either he or his fellow gang member had ultimately inflicted the last gunshot wound. He had a gunshot wound to the head that he either inflicted himself or his gang member did it. And Rattlesnake had always bragged to his gang about that he would never be arrested, and he would rather go down in a gunfight. Or if he was wounded, he always told the rest of his gang to, put him out of his misery and, get out of there. But interestingly enough, they also found a letter on Rattlesnake Dick when they searched his body. And it was a letter that he kept in his jacket pocket from his sister. As I stated before, he came from a Christian family, and the letter that he had in his jacket pocket was from his sister, encouraging him and admonishing him to turn back to Christ, to turn back to Jesus and be the man that they all know that he is, which was a good man and a man of faith. And it was just a letter of just encouragement and admonishing him to be a good man and to forsake his life of crime. And it's very interesting that he died with that letter in his pocket as well. So yeah, very interesting story. So we're standing here in front of Auburn Oddfellows Lodge number 7. It is a secret society and fraternal order here in Auburn, California. And in reference to the whole Rattlesnake Dick story, it's interesting to note that the Oddfellows were actually the ones that took the responsibility of burying Rattlesnake Dick after he was shot and killed in 1859. I am a member of this secret society. I was tapped about 2 years ago, so there's a lot of really deep, rich, interesting history associated with our lodge here in Auburn. And ironically enough, it was the Oddfellows that buried Rattlesnake Dick, and ironically, Rattlesnake's arch rival and nemesis, John Boggs of the Placer County Sheriff's Department, he just so happened to be a Freemason. Right up the street from our lodge is the Masonic Temple and Lodge here in Auburn, and John Boggs was he was an officer there. He was either the secretary or a treasurer. So, yep, a lot of deep history here. The Oddfellows began in Auburn in 1852. This actual temple and lodge was built in 1891. And yeah, just a really interesting fact that it was the Oddfellows that oversaw burying Rattlesnake after he was shot and killed, and that his arch rival was a Freemason right down the street. So in closing, I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Grave Time. Stay tuned for more episodes to drop. Please like this video and please subscribe. Christian has got a lot more content coming, and great history, deep history, and please join us on the next episode. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a good one.